So, what happens when the world just stops making sense? Today, we're going to investigate a story about a reality that quietly, and for no good reason, began to unravel. And our only clues? They're the firsthand accounts of the people who were actually there, just trying to figure out the impossible. It all kicks off with this one deeply weird observation. This quote is really our central clue. These creatures didn't just pop into existence, they trickled. Just think about that word for a second. It's not instant. It suggests a process, something slow and gradual. And that single detail? That's our very first sign that the basic rules of reality are starting to bend. All right, so let's dig into that first crack in reality. It wasn't some huge explosion or an earthquake. Nope, it was the arrival of these strange, impossible creatures. And this didn't happen in some big city or a top-secret lab. It all went down in a quiet, ordinary village. One single, unexplainable event just disrupted everything. The world didn't end with a bang, it seems. It started with this quiet, creeping feeling that something was just wrong. And here we get one of the first human reactions, and it is not at all what you'd expect. It's not just panic. For this person, these impossible creatures are, get this, an inconvenience. They're actually more annoyed about missing a movie than about the possible end of the world as they know it. It's this bizarre mix of the absolutely extraordinary and the totally mundane that makes this whole thing so fascinating. And this is where the mystery really starts to get deep. It's so easy to just point at the creatures and say, yep, they're the problem. But what if they weren't? What if they were just the first, most obvious symptom of something much, much bigger going wrong underneath it all? And yeah, from there, things started to escalate, and fast. It became pretty clear pretty quickly that this wasn't just about some weird creatures. The very fabric of their world was actually starting to change. This was way more than an isolated incident. It was like a domino effect of strangeness. The water suddenly became undrinkable. The trees didn't look right anymore. Boulders would just materialize out of thin air. Even physics itself seemed to be glitching. And then came the one that just blows your mind. I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It's not just a talking animal. It's a dog that is fully aware that it shouldn't be able to talk. It's questioning the very possibility of its own thoughts. We're not just talking about a minor weird thing here. This is a complete rewrite of biology and consciousness. At this point, the world isn't just fraying. It's being actively rewritten. So, okay, your entire reality is falling apart. How do you even begin to process that? To really get what happened next, we have to listen to the very different ways the villagers tried to wrap their heads around it all. Well, first up, you've got the voice of pure existential dread. This person sees all these strange events not as a mystery to solve, but as a terrible warning. A sign that things might seem minor now, but it's all hopeless in the long run. For them, pessimism isn't just a mood, it's a fundamental law of this new universe. But then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum from that despair, you find pragmatism. This person isn't giving in to fear. No way. They're taking action. They're convinced that if they can just collect enough stuff, examine the physical evidence, an answer has to be in there somewhere. It's that human drive to find order and reason, even when the world has gone completely mad. And finally, there's this third perspective, a kind of collaborative philosophical approach. And what's interesting is this is person two again. The same person who first noticed the creatures trickling into existence. They don't see this as a disaster or a science project. They see it as a puzzle that life itself has thrown at them, and one they can only solve if they all work together. So with all these different ideas floating around, the village basically splits in two. And their search for answers fuels this really fascinating clash between what you might call scientific reason and, well, mystical belief. And this slide just lays out that split perfectly. On one side, you have theories that are rooted in folklore and mysticism, a ritual dance that creates special particles, a belief that the creatures are connected to the loneliness of rocks, a secret book that explains everything. And then, on the other side, you start to see the first baby steps of a scientific approach, the idea that the creatures form from clouds, kind of like fog, or that maybe a massive psychological event happened first, triggering all the physical changes. And look, don't just write off the mystical side as some quiet superstition.
This quote from one of the village sages, it shows you how passionate they were. There's this fiery conviction that they absolutely can solve this, even if their methods, like a ritual dance, seem totally irrational to us. They had their own system of logic, and they believed in it. So, after all this debate, all this investigation, where did they land? Well, the most developed scientific theory that came out of all this is absolutely fascinating, but it's really important to remember that a complete answer, that was still just out of reach. Okay, so the leading theory got this great name, the coalesced fog hypothesis. And the idea is pretty wild. It suggests these creatures aren't aliens, they're not from another dimension, they're from right here on Earth. It's a bizarre natural phenomenon where moisture in the air basically condenses and assembles itself into living things right there on the ground. And what's so cool about this, what makes it so convincing, is how it connects right back to our very first clue. Remember how they trickled into being? This hypothesis lines up perfectly with that. It suggests a process just like condensation, slow, gradual, coming from the sky, only the end result defies all known biology.
And there's always a but in a story like this. As brilliant as the coalesced fog hypothesis is for explaining the creatures, it doesn't explain everything else. It doesn't tell us why the dog could talk, why the water went bad, or why the laws of physics themselves seem to be changing. The real root cause of the whole unraveling, that remained a complete mystery. And so we're left not with an answer, but with a question that really sticks with you. When the very fabric of existence starts to come apart, where do you even begin to look for solid ground? In science? In belief? Or maybe just in each other? That's the real puzzle at the heart of this story, and it's one that's absolutely worth thinking about.